This video, we have a special guest. His name is Dustin. In this video specifically, we're going to learn about how he became a software engineer without a degree, as well as his career journey looked like, and why did he choose to be a self-taught, and also how did he learn to become a software engineer. And lastly, we're also going to talk about, how did he prepare to get into Microsoft as a software engineer. So Dustin, welcome to this show.
Hey, thanks for having me. All right, much appreciated.
Yeah, so Dustin, could you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. Like you said, I'm a self-taught software developer. I wouldn't say it was necessarily by choice. I guess we all started as self-taught kind of thing. But that's the journey that I took, and decided to not go with the degree side and just kind of jump right into work. And like you had said there, I'm working at Microsoft now, so that's the short of it before we go into the details of it. But that's the basics of my journey. I've got 2 kids, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old now. Married, living in Canada, up in Vancouver, and things have been going pretty well, and having a great time actually working at Microsoft. I've been there like 5 months now.
Yeah, awesome. Now, first of all, could you tell us a bit more about your career journey so far? How did you start it to learn about software engineer? How did you get started, and all the way to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess even before I thought of it as a career, I was already in tech in my mind. It's kind of a fortunate thing. It's not for everybody. It's not that everybody's going to have that opportunity. But as a kid, I was exposed to computers from like 8 or 9 years old, where my dad had a computer kind of thing, and I just jumped into it right there and started playing with DOS and Windows and figuring out how to do basic stuff. And it was almost always to just try to learn my own thing and try to make a website or that kind of thing. If anyone, I have a YouTube channel where I kind of do my little side project where I'm making another website that has kind of been a culmination of me, this journey of working on software and trying to figure out how to make cool websites, basically. And that's something that started back in like 1995, maybe somewhere around there, when I was like 9 or 10. So that's probably the start of my journey of learning computers and becoming self-taught, and just having a confidence with just jumping into computers and problem solving and not being worried about breaking stuff, as I was breaking it all the time, and it was just kind of easy to fix it with computers. So after that, I out of high school, I guess around 17, not quite 18, I had the decision to go possibly to college or university up in Saskatchewan, and I decided I already kind of knew a little bit of what looked like the first year, and I thought, I'm just going to jump into just some computer stuff. I love computers. I want to see computers. So I ended up working in IT and just kind of doing computer repair, that kind of thing. I think that maybe is a field that some people go into that are just like professional computer touchers, or I was the person in the family who was always fixing printers, or they, you know computers? Okay, great. And in that job, I was there for about 6 or 7 years doing various IT related things, and I was always trying to make little tools and learning C# and VB6, but it was always just for utility reasons. It wasn't like, I'm trying to further my career, or I want to get into software, especially get into Microsoft. That was almost like always never. It was always a dream of mine to be able to get to somewhere like a Microsoft, specifically Microsoft. But it was like a yeah right kind of thing. This isn't going to happen. I don't really have a plan for it. And long story short, jumping ahead, there's a big career gap where I ended up kind of giving up on the whole IT thing and traveling the world for about 4 years. And then skipping ahead, I moved to BC, to British Columbia, back to Canada with my wife, and decided, I'm done with IT, but I'm never going to be done with computers. I've learned even more about software. I'm going to try to become a software developer. And so I just kind of got my foot in the door again as like a professional computer toucher, where it's like, we need someone who can build computers, build websites, whatever kind of thing. And I jumped in there, and the first company I worked at, I ended up staying almost 4 years, where I went from basically just a generic software developer, junior type person to like leading a group of quite a few people, like 3 or 4 people on one end and about 3 other people remotely. So it was just kind of a continuing journey of just trying that, and just always saying okay, or yeah, I think I can do that, and learning along the way. If you see behind me, there's some different books here, like one famous one that I can't remember the one. It's like that green one, the famous book about getting into the different FANG companies. And I think even the first chapter might be about Microsoft, and that alone was even inspirational. Just, oh wow, right at the start, it's like, okay, you probably want to get into Microsoft. So reading books like that was also something that I would do in my spare time as a self-taught person. But I always just used to get generic books. Like, I wouldn't try to get a C# book or a VB6 book. It would always be about computer concepts, or like Code Complete, Pragmatic Programmer, books that just kind of taught you fundamental concepts, and then I would go from there. And if there was that helped me in these jobs where I would just kind of, whatever anyone would throw at me, I'd be like, okay, sure. And that also allowed me to kind of call myself a full stack developer at the same time, as I kind of moved more towards a web focus, which in general I feel like the industry is going in a web focus lately, unless even in the back end, you're doing back end for like web apps a lot of the time. So and that's kind of where I am right now, is that after that job that I had for 4 years, I kind of jumped around for a year. Well, I wouldn't say jumped around. I had a job for 2 years years doing more like front end focused, and then another job at a company called Leader for 1 year, and then now I've started Microsoft for 6 months. So it's been a long time, and I've been working for, I would say, like maybe 13, 14 years in total if you consider my IT and software career. But in software, it's just been about 7 years now, I guess, and I've had various titles, but to be called lead, and my last job I was senior, but now at Microsoft I'm considered a software engineer level 2, and I haven't really focused too much on the titles either. It's always just been about, in my whole career, just kind of been like, yeah, I can try that, I'll do that kind of thing, and just taking any opportunities that come at me. That's the short of it.
Gotcha. That's very interesting. I guess one follow-up question is, you mentioned that taking a gap to, travel around the world. Why did you make that decision? Did you also have like a software development job at the side, or like doing some freelancing work, or like what's the motivation behind that?
Well, it was that I'd already kind of felt like I was peaking in the IT field. I'd already been a service manager at a few of my jobs where, it wasn't mom and pop shops, but if you start fixing computers, service managers kind of really almost the height of you can go, and then you kind of looking around, where do you go from there kind of thing. There really isn't a lot of options, to be honest, in that industry, unless you want to start doing networking or contracting or that kind of thing. And that really wasn't what I was looking for. Also, I was living in Saskatchewan, and it wasn't really where I wanted to stay for the rest of my life. I'm much happier here in British Columbia. For people that live in Canada and know the different provinces, it's a little too cold in Saskatchewan. It gets to the negative 40s for like 4 or 5 months out of the year or more, and not always, but enough where it wasn't for me kind of thing. So those were some of the things that really spurred it, and it actually started. I haven't really done a video yet on my world travels, but it started as just a couple weeks trip, and I'm just kind of one of those people that does a lot of research. So I started researching the practicality of what I could do with the money I had, how I could make it go further, how people do travel the world, and I started reading about couch surfing and reading blogs about different people that had done it, and I realized it was possible. So I decided, I'm just going to sell everything and just see if I can couch surf around the world and see how far that'll last me. And it pretty much, I could have just kept doing that for the rest of my life if I wanted to. I'd found a way to do it sustainably, and occasionally I would do some computer repair, that kind of thing. It was still very IT focused. I still wasn't thinking software necessarily. I did occasionally do like websites with my dad, but it would be just like the most generic websites, kind of just helping him with, he would do graphic design, and I would just kind of help put the graphics into a website kind of thing. So that wasn't really anything. But no, it was really only when I moved to BC and I decided that I knew I could make software. I'd made little open source projects that before I even really knew what open source was, like I was putting them on Planet source code or doing like plugins for media portal, something like that. I didn't even really know I was programming almost. It's like I knew I was making a plugin or a program, but I just thought it was like scripting almost. I don't even know. I hadn't really professionalized it and formalized it into, this can be a career, I should focus on this. And that's when I moved to BC and decided, seeing everybody around me kind of doing it and what the industry was there, that I wanted to try to focus my efforts there.
Got it. That's very interesting. Another follow-up question is, you mentioned that you have experience working on the front end, the web part, and also the back end part as well. Now, I think we chatted before that current position at Microsoft, your responsibility is more on the front end. So could you maybe tell us a bit more, like, what do you like about front end? Because you have both experience in the front end and the back end. What do you like about it that motivates you to continue going down this path?
Right. Well, I almost feel like the front end is the end of the experience, kind of like the back end is usually the facilitator. It is. Depending on what you're working on, like there were times where I was working on like SQL stored procedures with 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, where I was spending months working on just stored procedures in SQL, and I guess I would call that back end. I definitely didn't do anything in the UI, and it was just very conceptual, organizing tables and different logic, and it's not as fun for some reason, I suppose. Perhaps there's something about having that visual ooh and ah and being able to play with the pixels a little bit. I guess there was something too that I did hesitate for the longest time with the front end, where I'm not really graphically good, I would say, at making designs. I usually rely on what the people at Figma make, and I'm always happy with their decisions whenever I'm working with designers. And that's why I think in my side project I've kind of tried to replicate and copy, and that's always kind of been something I've been better at, is trying to do perfect copies of things. And I enjoy the effort there in the accuracy and even like in making the mistakes and just kind of pointing them out and that kind of thing. So maybe that's kind of where I focused in. And yeah, just the back end, it's a little harder to do that, I suppose. The back end is very hectic, I suppose. There's just a
Yeah,
lot going on
especially
there.
there's many languages, many services and technology and stuff, whereas front end is just JavaScript.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess maybe it's my bad experiences with stored procedures too, where I know the back end's such a mess of wires, and you see some joking comics out there sometimes where the front end's very nice and in the back it's just a complete nasty mess. And but to be honest, you get a bit of that in the front end code as well. I guess I've liked the greenfield projects, and I guess there's been a lot of greenfield front end projects more so than back end lately. That's just so I've been grabbing those opportunities.
Got it. Now I wanted to shift our conversation to, learn more about, why did you choose to go down this self-taught route? Like what makes you want to go down this path? And I know that you mentioned earlier that, you already have some experience, in the past, so it didn't really make sense to go to college. But like, I guess did you like don't really like the college, like getting the 4 years degree and all that? Like what are some other things that motivate you to go down that path?
Yeah, I think that was one part of it too. I mean, I think when I thought about going down the university path, I understood it's not like you're just focused on computers, and my mind was so into computers, and I guess I wasn't looking to be a well-rounded individual. I was just so focused on IT and computers and things like that. And so in that way, I guess there were opportunities for colleges degrees and that kind of thing, and more specific degrees. But it just didn't seem like for me, I suppose. Like I wasn't really I'm not a straight A student in high school as well either. I was always I could always, like in computer science, I was doing like 95s or whatever it was. Like I was doing very well in the CS20, CS30, whatever it was for grade 12. I think I finished that in grade 9 or something. So I definitely had an aptitude for it and I enjoyed it. But schooling in general wasn't for me, and I kind of always liked the self-taught route. And I think as soon as I got into computer science, even in high school, I was already doing like the more advanced stuff, just because I didn't have interest in doing what the teacher was saying. I was like, okay, let's just see what's all the material, like what are the programs we can do, and let's just jump to the end kind of thing. So maybe perhaps for that reason, thinking university wasn't for me. And also from a financial point of view, it really my family wasn't one of those families where they're like, you got to go to university, we've saved for university. There was no real savings. It was like, you're going to go in debt if you're going to go to university, and nobody was really pushing me to it. It was kind of about deciding to do what I wanted to do. So my parents have always been pretty supportive like that, and I think that's probably a big thing that I've heard from when I talk to people in university, or that went down a university route, is it usually came down to at least partially their parents were in some way saying, yeah, you should do it, and my parents really didn't say that ever. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's very interesting. I guess, like, how did you learn everything after you made the decision that you don't want to go to college?
Right.
Is it mostly like online, or did you talk to a lot of people? Did you go to like boot camp, or did you go to some classes, or how did you learn everything?
Well, I've always had a fear that I haven't learned everything, I guess. And I mean, obviously I haven't, but I always wonder what I've missed. And maybe that's a good drive to have, because it's always made me kind of try to learn more. And like I say, having all these books and that kind of thing, like some of those are essentially college textbooks in size, and there's no reason out of university to be reading those, but I'll just sit down and kind of go page by page and try to find useful information from them. I'm not trying to think of them as, oh, I have an assignment, or that the prof said to read this. I don't even really know what the system of university is. The prof's like, read chapter 1 today. I really have no idea even. But as far as my self-taught system, it was always just based on interest. So I've tried to keep my interests broad, I suppose. Again, going back to this project of mine, I think that was a huge one, because I'm basically just trying to put every single web technology I can think of into that the browser can handle into the browser. Basically, that's what I was. Even in 1999, my site was called the Miscellaneous website, and I remember I had like made a screensaver from some like random screensaver making program, and I put that on there, and I had like movie reviews, and I had Java games, like a Java applet. I had some kind of Flash macro media thing on my site. This is like in 1999, 1998. So I guess it's always just been an interest of mine to try to do anything that's possible on a computer, and that's kind of just been my self-direction. But at the same time, I guess, and getting to where we talk about getting into Microsoft, getting into certain companies, that's where there's been a big focus on like data structures, algorithms, that kind of thing. At least that's what I've seen. That's what's happened in some of my interviews, and that's not something that I typically run into in the programming world. That's something that I ran into with that one book that I had, that big green book, where they kind of talk to you about preparing for these FANG interviews, and it's kind of it's kept me scared from moving into that industry for a while, actually, and which is why for the first like 4 or 5 years in British Columbia, I mostly just stayed with like contract jobs, or just like if the interview went in that direction, question, I was just kind of like panicking and was like, oh no, I'm not prepared. And to be honest, I would say I never did get prepared in the way of grinding. It's really not my thing. I'm not a grinder of information. So the way that I kind of tackled the algorithm and data structure concept was to try to just basically do interviews, essentially. I mean, this is where I say that COVID was an opportunity in that we started having all these interviews just remotely on our computers, and I took the opportunity to apply to a bunch of different opportunities and to try to learn what the interview process was like and what they would ask, and just kind of throw myself into the fire and see, okay, well, what's it like? And I also did watch YouTube videos on different interviews that people had done and that kind of thing. But I always did try to steer away from the LeetCode and the hacker rank and that kind of thing, just because I felt like that was some kind of grinding game. And although there was value to it and there is value to the algorithms and the data structures, I didn't want to go down that route, and I didn't want to have to know that to get in the door, basically. So yeah, that was my main approach, I suppose, was just to kind of always be able to just solve the problem. And if I can't solve it, then I'm not ready to be hired, basically, was my mentality on it.
Right, I see. So basically, like taking more interviews and try to get some experience from there, right? So because it seems like like I think a lot of people think that grinding LeetCode, yes, once you get to a certain level, you're pretty good at data structure and algorithm, but once you get a job, you're not gonna use those things that you learn. So it's not really that practical. I think I kind of agree with you there, sure.
Yeah, it's not even just a practicality thing, but even just that was always a problem I had even in high school when it came to studying for tests, is I felt there was some arbitrariness to the memorization of it. And I saw people that were better at memorizing stuff and better at like staying up late at night and just kind of jamming it in their brain. They were doing better at those things, but I don't feel like that they knew the content any better than me. So that's why I'd rather be thrown into an interview and be sweating bullets and just in front of an empty whiteboard. And I did a lot of those interviews as well before COVID, and just kind of testing myself with it. And I think the biggest thing I learned, one of the books I had too, I think, was like soft skills, programmer soft skills. And I think that's an important part to the interview, is that most if not all of the algorithm data structure questions I did at any of my interviews, I don't think I passed. Like, I don't think I finished them. I think I just kept talking and I was in the right direction, and I was pointing out the things I wasn't doing correctly, because I knew it's like oh, if they just gave me time, or if they just gave me a chance, that's how I always felt after interviews. So it got to the point where I would just continually, line by line, be explaining, well, here's what I'm thinking, but here's what I think you're thinking about what I'm thinking, and I wouldn't always go quite that deep into it, but that's almost how I had to treat the interview, to be like proving myself the entire way that, look, I have a method for understanding this, but we might not get to a result in this interview. And eventually that I was able to convey that enough where people could see that I understood it, and that we were in the right direction, even if necessarily I didn't finish it, which I don't think I did in several of them, even the Microsoft ones that I did.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think because a lot of people, when they study LeetCode, their expectations, like they're getting into an interview, they're gonna getting asked like a hard question or something, and interviewer just there to test you if you can solve it or something. But in reality, I think, like you mentioned, it's not like that. It's sometimes the interviewer are willing to help you out, willing to working on the communication skills, right? Able to solve a problem together with the interviewee. I think that's kind of like the reality of it, and I think I do agree with you there. Now I do want to kind of ask you, just to finish off like the learning part, like I guess what kind of resources do you recommend people to learn from, if they're self-taught, if they're trying to go down the self-taught route, what kind of resources or things that they should do to learn to become a self-taught developer?
Right. Well, I guess for me, it's been the having the generalist mentality, and then trying to pick a good language to be able to play around with, something where you can kind of just jump in. And for that, I've always just said like JavaScript or TypeScript. I'll say JavaScript just because you can jump in. Like, you could open up an empty browser, open up DevTools, and just start typing. Or you can open up, just make an index.html file on your computer, open that up at Notepad, and start writing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and just open that up right away. So I feel like that's always been a great way for me to start learning, because the language itself is quite powerful. And then if you were to get a book like, let's say, this Code Complete 2 book that I had, I mean, it's kind of outdated, or something like Pragmatic Programmer. These generalist books that kind of just teach you about what are the idea of functions, what's the concept of loops, and the idea of clean code, about that you're writing for other people to read. Like, that's something that's been important in my career, at least, that I don't feel enough people care about, is writing the code as if like I'm an author, and these are pages of a book, kind of. And that's I guess where I've taken a lot of PRs as learning opportunities. opportunities. But if you're self-taught, I guess in that way, then I would say open source is another opportunity as well. So that's where I would say to push for a side project. And yeah, I guess that's got to be one of the biggest ones that I always say is like make a JavaScript side project, and then right away you can kind of dive into the whole concept of programming and take that in any direction you want, I would say.
Yeah, I see. Because I saw your project that you posted on YouTube and also your GitHub. It is crazy big. It is really complex. Do you recommend people to build their personal project as complex as that, or do you think it's just a simple app like to-do app, or like a calculator app or something like that? Like, I guess what kind of personal projects should they build to put on their resume?
I actually would not recommend to-do apps necessarily. And yeah, I would say don't do what I did necessarily. Like, don't copy what I did. Like, oh, I have to make another desktop environment or that kind of thing. But that was my moonshot. That was my, I want to make this. It's actually something I saw an interview from a programmer, George Hotz. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's a somewhat famous programmer. And he was talking about some tool that he tried to make and this was him explaining how he became a better programmer, I believe. And he was saying he made it once and it wasn't very bad. And then he made it again. It was a little less bad. And he basically iterated on this program, and over the years it made the same thing over and over again. And that's essentially what I've been doing with this miscellaneous website idea. And the desktop environment was just the next step in the idea of putting the web of miscellaneous and just what is possible, what can be on there. So I would say if you're going to get into programming and you're going to have a side project and you want to have fun with it and you want to make it a huge learning experience, then you should shoot for the stars, and you should, like, what is the thing that you want to do? Like, 10 years from now, when you know how to do everything in programming, when you're in my position, I don't know everything in programming, but when you know enough to feel confident to go, I'm going to do that project I want to do. What is it? And then just start trying to do it now. And it's okay if you fail, because it's just a learning experience.
Gotcha. And then another question that I want to ask you about is, I guess, so you were a senior developer in the past, and also you also were a lead developer. So one question that I have is, does it bother you to get promoted without a degree or without like formal university education, any of those things?
Like, is it difficult to, do you mean, or?
Yeah, I guess like my question would be like, does degree matter when you try to get promoted as like senior level developer or lead developer or even a tech lead or something?
Right. Well, I would say it's never come up, honestly. No one's really ever mentioned the degree to me. I mean, it's not mentioned in my resume, does not have a degree. It's not, I don't have a degree in there, but I don't go out of my way to say I don't have one. But honestly, no one's ever asked, and it's never come up in any promotions or anything. But so it's hard for me to say if it's affected it, like it's not like my manager said, oh, if you had a degree, I would have gave you a promotion a year ago, that kind of thing. But that being said, I'd still say no, to be honest. I would say the most of this, it's because I have the experience that I have, because I've been in the field as long as I have, maybe even because I had my IT experience, even though it wasn't in the field. It was already, okay, this guy's a little bit older than some of the other people. He's already been working for 6 or 7 years. So it's possible I was already given a little bit of a foot in the door kind of thing. But I would say that I always did expect to have to work harder, and I didn't expect that, hey, you should treat me the same even though I haven't done this degree. I did understand that. So I would say anybody taking the self-taught route, they should go in expecting that and just understand that means you have to work harder, because there's other people that have gone down and given that time, So if you're coming in and you don't have the experience and you don't have the degree, you really probably shouldn't be expecting much of anything. You have to get one of those at least.
Right, I see. So basically, like, people to work hard and be able to get experience and be able to compensate that, I guess, right?
Yeah, and you have to be humble too, and you have to expect that people aren't going to think what there's just some self-taught guy. What does he know? You're going to be challenged all the time, kind of.
Got it. Now, my last question is, how did you get into Microsoft? I guess, like, what kind of preparation did you do to prepare? I guess you mentioned that earlier, that you look at the green book, like the Cracking the Coding interview book.
That's the name. Yeah.
And then you don't really do too much like LeetCode or HackerRank. You just really go by the experience. Try to communicate in the interview and all that kind of thing, and also talk about your experience and personal project and all that. I guess, is that how you prepare for Microsoft interview, or did you also do any other preparations?
Yeah, that was the most part. I mean, I would say that not the biggest. It's hard to say what were the biggest preparations, but before I did the Microsoft thing, I'd already been doing my streams on YouTube for a while too, and I do feel like that actually helped. Like, I'm not sure what an outlet someone else might be able to have, but it was a great opportunity opportunity, again, going back to the having these interviews through video chat, was that I'd already had this week. I'd been doing weekly 2-3 hour streams where it's just me in front of the camera by myself explaining my coding the entire time. So I'd already kind of had a lot of experience that way, and I actually do feel like that had helped me in the interview. So when I was doing coding, it was very easy for me to not just be sitting there thinking. I could always kind of keep explaining because I already had 100 hours of content where I knew people were watching me live, and I knew people were going to watch the video later live, and they don't want to just have me sitting there and just have dead silence. So I'd had a lot of experience, I guess, in speaking about code, and I think that's probably one of the most important parts of the interview, is just being able to explain your thinking process and kind of prove that you're in the right direction even if you don't get there.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, speaking of stream, I guess I want to mention about your YouTube channel, about what do you do online. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Well, my YouTube channel is kind of another miscellaneous project of mine, but it has been software development focused, and more specifically, it's been focused on my side project, I'd say, for the first year of its inception. I guess I'm in my second year now, and it's been a somewhat popular YouTube channel, which I've been very appreciative of, to get to show people all my different project ideas and that kind of thing. And I've also just a couple weeks ago or just a week ago, I guess, did my first video where the life and the life of a software developer, basically, day in the life of a software developer. That's the one. And that's something I've been interested in for a while, because I guess that has been a big inspiration too, as a self-taught developer, just as a developer in general. Over the last 5 years watching YouTube, I've seen a lot of interesting content and a lot of content developers, and I don't know if there's something about me, but I am the kind of person that likes to make stuff. So I've always wanted to kind of get into that, and actually even 20 years ago, there was a website, dbcam.com was my website, a domain I had when I was like 12 or something, that I registered, where I had a webcam that was I built in my computer, that this had an old ISA slot card, and just really old tech, because I was trying to do basically before YouTube the same idea. So I've always had an inspiration for kind of putting my ideas online and just kind of experimenting with tech, basically, and that's what my YouTube channel is about.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess one question that I have is, what's your plan for YouTube? Because I know that so far, I think if my audience are watching, I definitely highly recommend to check out his channel, Dustin Brett, right?
Yeah, just Dustin Brett. I think that's my name and my channel name as well. I try to use that name wherever I can.
Gotcha. I guess what kind of goal that you have with YouTube in the future, your YouTube channel? Could you tell us a bit more about that? What can the audience expect from you?
Sure. Well, I do have some interesting plans as far as some interviews that I've got. Well, I don't have anything lined up, but as I've been building my project, there's been so many libraries, open source libraries that I've worked with, and I've ended up kind of contributing to some of them and talking to some of the other developers, and I'd like to start interviewing some of them. So I've kind of put a few teasers out there to some people, and they're interested. So kind of like what I've seen you doing and getting inspired by doing even this interview, is that's one direction I'd like to take it, is doing more interviews and kind of shining a light on some of these developers. I'll name one that I have not talked to at all and have no connection to, but just as far as I went on YouTube and I looked for this V86 emulator that emulates x86 processors, basically, and you can run ISO files and stuff. It's got 13,000 stars, but the developer has basically no presence on YouTube and can't find any information about him. And it's just that there's these huge projects out there where essentially they're run by anonymous people, and I hope to be able to give some of them a voice. There's some like that out there, I guess. I've seen some audio podcasts, but I hope to have opportunities to do video. I guess I'm a video person, so it'd be good to see some of their faces, and that's something, I guess, my inspiration for that, I don't know if you've seen them, is the Lex Friedman. If you've seen those podcasts, I don't know if that's something I'd aspire to, but if I had the opportunity to be able to interview some of the tech people that he's interviewed, like program language makers and that kind of thing, that would be very interesting. So maybe that's the long-term goal, I guess, but I haven't really thought that far ahead.
Gotcha. That's very interesting, I guess. So that's it for this show, and I do want to wrap up by asking you to maybe give any final advice to people who are still watching this, wondering how can they go from a self-taught to a to become a software engineer, even better, how can they even go from a self-taught to a senior level position or a tech lead? Do you have any final words or any final advice that you would like to wrap up for the show?
Sure. Well, I myself am not a senior yet at Microsoft, but my mentality on it has always been to just follow my passion, and that's what I would recommend for others. That's what I've done in my self-taught career, and that's why my title has kind of gone up and down as it has, is because that's what I've tried not to focus on. That I've tried to focus on doing interesting work and kind of making a career for myself, and actually focusing on what a career means. And it's not about a big paycheck necessarily or jumping jobs all the time. It's about the direction of my life and being able to work at an interesting company and kind of build the future. So that's what I try to focus on. And I think if you have that mentality, you're going to be senior, you're going to be lead, you're going to be whatever in the future. It's going to take time. You got to be patient, but at the same time, what's the rush? If you're enjoying the journey.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you very much, Dustin, for taking the time.